Sunlight spilled down the concrete stairwell of the downtown subway entrance, like it was trying to reach a place it didn't belong. Morning traffic glinted off windscreens above ground. Across the street, a cafe's door stood open to the warm air, espresso steam drifting out with the soft hiss of pressure. A bus exhaled at the curb. Coins clattered into a shopkeeper's register. Somewhere, kids laughed on their way to school, and on the subway steps. Half in shadow, half in daylight, Samuel Reed adjusted the frayed edge of his coat as the sun touched his eyes that he squinted. Blinking upward at the sky, he could barely see between buildings. His shoes, worn, cracked at the soles, tapped lightly on the concrete as he shifted his weight. A small paper cup sat near his knee with exactly 3 coins inside. They made a soft metallic sound every time a train thundered below. Footsteps passed him in quick, indifferent rhythms, some slowed. Most didn't. Samuel wasn't old, but the years had folded into his posture. Late 40s, maybe. His beard was trimmed unevenly, as if he still tried to care, even when no one watched. A faded backpack rested against the railing beside him. He kept one hand on it like it might drift away if he didn't. Inside the station, the city hummed, distant sirens, echoing voices. The hollow wind of tunnels breathing in and out. Hey. The voice was sharp. Samuel lifted his head slowly. 2 uniformed officers stood at the base of the stairs. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his badge catching the light. The other was younger, narrower, eyes scanning the steps like he was already bored of what he saw. "You can't stay here," the taller officer said. "Move along." Samuel nodded faintly. "I'm not blocking anyone." "Doesn't matter," the younger one said. "This entrance stays clear." Samuel pressed his palm to the cold concrete and began to stand. His knee protested. The movement wasn't quick enough, the tall officer sighed. "Sir, we don't have time for this." Before Samuel could straighten, a hand caught his arm. Not violent. Not gentle either. The world shifted abruptly. His backpack slid from the railing and hit the steps with a dull thud. The sound echoed louder than it should have. "Hey, wait," Samuel said, instinctively. The younger officer grabbed the other arm. Commuters slowed. A woman with a coffee froze mid-step. Someone behind her whispered something quiet and uneasy. Samuel's shoes scraped against the concrete as he was pulled upright. "I was standing up," he said, breath uneven. "I was just, save it," the younger officer muttered. The cafe across the street hissed again with steam. Sunlight warmed the brick wall outside like nothing was wrong. Samuel didn't struggle. He just blinked against the brightness as he was turned and pulled toward the open sidewalk. The paper cup tipped. Coins scattered. They rang against the concrete in small, sharp notes. For a moment, no one moved. The sound hung there. Then people kept walking. The tall officer bent, picked up the cup, and shoved it back into Samuel's hand. "You can collect your change somewhere else." Samuel's fingers curled reflexively around the rim that a woman in business clothes hesitated near the curb. Her mouth opened slightly. Then she looked away and crossed the street. The younger officer guided Samuel forward with a firm hand between his shoulder blades. "Where are you taking him?" someone finally asked. The words came from a man standing near the cafe window, his face caught upside down in the glass. "For questioning," the tall officer said automatically. "About what?" The man pressed. "About loitering." The officer replied. Samuel's throat moved as he swallowed. They stopped beside the patrol car parked just past the bus stop. Sunlight flashed off the windshield, briefly blinding him. The younger officer opened the back door. "Hands on the roof," he said. Samuel complied slowly. His palms flattened against warm metal. The heat surprised him that a pause followed. Not long, but long enough for the street to feel suddenly quiet. Too quiet. The tall officer looked at Samuel's backpack lying on the sidewalk. "You got ID?" he asked. Samuel hesitated. "Yes." The younger officer shot him a look of mild surprise. Samuel nodded toward the backpack. "Side pocket." The tall officer retrieved it, unzipped the pocket, and pulled out a cracked wallet. Inside was a worn plastic card that he glanced at it, then frowned. "Dispatch," he said into his radio. "Running ID." Samuel closed his eyes briefly as the sunlight pressed against his face. This wasn't how the morning was supposed to go. And across the street, the cafe's door swung open again, warm air spilling out as the city kept moving. The patrol car idled at the curb. Heat shimmered faintly above the hood. People gathered in subtle half-circles, never too close, never fully gone. Samuel sat in the back seat now, door closed. The plastic partition reflected the sky in pale streaks. He rested his hands loosely on his knees. They trembled just enough to notice. Across the street, sunlight sliced through the cafe windows, laying rectangles of brightness across empty tables. The tall officer stood by the radio. "Yeah," he said, listening. "Uh-huh." He glanced at the ID again. His jaw tightened. The younger officer leaned against the car door, arms folded, posture casual. "What's the holdup?" The radio crackled again. The tall officer straightened. "You're sure?" he asked. Another pause. Samuel watched everything through reflections. Badge, sky, brick walls. The movement of lips he couldn't hear. The tall officer turned slowly toward the car. The younger officer followed his gaze, curiosity flickering across his face. "What?" he asked. The tall officer didn't answer immediately. He walked to the back door and opened it. Samuel looked up. "Sir," the tall officer said differently now. "Quieter. Can you step out?" Samuel's hands tightened in his lap. "Am I being arrested?" The officer hesitated. "No." Samuel rose carefully and stepped onto the sidewalk again. The city noise rushed back and around him. The younger officer tilted his head, sensing the shift but not understanding it yet. The tall officer lifted the radio. "Dispatch, can you confirm the date?" The response crackled. Samuel stood between them, sunlight warming one side of his face, shadow holding the other. The younger officer frowned. "What's going on?" The tall officer glanced at Samuel again. Really looked at him this time. Not the coat, not the beard, the eyes. "Dispatch just confirmed," he said slowly. "This ID belongs to Detective Samuel Reed. Retired. Metro Narcotics." The younger officer's arms dropped from their folded position. "What?" A woman near the cafe gasped quietly. Samuel closed his eyes with a tired exhale. The tall officer swallowed. "Sir, is that correct?" Samuel nodded once. Silence stretched, long enough that the sunlight made it heavier. The younger officer looked at Samuel like he was seeing him for the first time. "You were a cop?" "30 years, Samuel said. The words weren't proud. They were simply true. The tall officer stepped back half a pace. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Samuel gave a small, humorless smile. "You didn't ask who I was. You told me to move." The words weren't sharp, but they hit harder than shouting would have. The younger officer shifted his weight. "Why are you here?" Samuel looked down at the cracked pavement. "My wife got sick," he said. "Cancer. Fast one. Drained what little savings we had. After she passed, I sold the house to cover what the insurance didn't. Thought I'd find work again. Turns out nobody hires an old detective with a limp." The younger officer swallowed. The tall officer rubbed the back of his neck. "You should have been treated with more respect." Samuel met his eyes. Respect doesn't need a badge. A bus hissed at the curb. Rain began lightly, barely more than mist. Tiny dark dots formed on the pavement. A man from the crowd spoke up. They dragged him like he was nothing. The younger officer flinched. The tall officer turned fully towards Samuel. "Sir, I owe you an apology." Samuel shook his head faintly. "You owe the next one better." The younger officer stared at the ground. A long pause settled between them. Then, the tall officer removed the handcuffs from his belt. Not dramatically, just quietly. "You're free to go," he said. Samuel nodded, and no cheers. No clapping. Just breath returning to places it had tightened. As he picked up his backpack, the younger officer spoke. "Detective. I mean, Samuel." He hesitated. "Is there anywhere you're supposed to be today?" Samuel considered the question. "Finally," he said, "this is where I usually sit." The younger officer nodded. Let me walk you back." Samuel studied him, then allowed it. They crossed the street together in warm drizzle as the cafe door opened again, steam curling outward like an invitation. Inside, the espresso machine hissed. Coins clinked into a register, and the city watched two men walk side by side who hadn't known, minutes before, that they ever could. Afternoon light drifted across the park bench where Samuel now sat. Trees filtered the sun into soft gold patterns. Children played at the far end of the green. Laughter floated on wind that smelled faintly of rain. The younger officer stood nearby. Awkward without a script, the tall officer approached with 2 paper cups from the cafe. "Black," he said, handing one to Samuel. "No sugar, just like you said." Samuel took it. The warmth surprised him more than the kindness. They Saturday for a while. No one spoke. The city settled into a new rhythm. You ever miss it? The younger officer asked quietly. Samuel sipped. I miss believing I could fix things. The younger officer nodded slowly. The tall officer cleared his throat. We filed a report. The correct one. Samuel tilted his head. And, and I recommended a referral to Veteran Services and Housing Assistance. The department has a quiet fund for things like this. Samuel breathed out. Not relief. Something softer. The younger officer looked at him. If you want, I could walk you over there tomorrow. Off duty. Samuel studied him. You do that? The officer nodded. It's the least I can do. Sunlight caught in the leaves overhead, dancing across their faces that a woman walking past the bench slowed. Excuse me, she said gently. You were the man from the subway, weren't you? Samuel braced himself. She smiled. I saw what happened, she said. And what happened after? She placed a folded note beside him on the bench. For coffee. Another one. Tomorrow. Samuel stared at it long after she left. The tall officer rose. We'll leave you to the rest of your day. Samuel stood too. The three shook hands. Grip to grip. Equal now.as the officers walked away. Samuel sat back down and watched the city under late afternoon light. Glass windows glowing. Street signs catching fire with brightness. A man helping a stroller over a curb. He opened his backpack and found the folded photo he always kept there. One of him and his wife on this same bench, years ago. Both squinting into sunlight. Both laughing. He placed the photo beside the coffee cup. The camera of the world pulled back that a streetlight clicked on softly as the day began to tilt toward evening, and Samuel Reed, no longer invisible, sat in the warm quiet of being seen. True wealth isn't measured in pounds or dollars, but in the lives we lift as we rise.